Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to Shutter Magazine this month. In this article, I'm going to talk about converting your color digital images into black and white. I'm going to be using Lightroom Creative Cloud to do that, as well as NYX Silver Efex Pro 2 software. A few things to talk about before we jump into Lightroom and start converting our images is, thinking about you're shooting in color, you're converting to black and white, but sometimes you notice that there's images that don't really look great in black and white. Maybe they require more work. And you're always sort of looking at images online, black and white images, and wondering how do they get those results. Um, something kind of more like this here. Something with a lot of contrast and a lot of drama already. I mean, a lot of things were brought into this image to make it appear this way. But there's also some things when shooting, you can shoot for black and white. And a really big thing is thinking about your range and tonality or just contrast in general. You're wanting a lot of contrast in the image, a lot of whites, blacks. Midtones as well are so important with black and white photography. But there's also some things you can do in post-production, which we're going to go over today, to really help you with your converting images to black and white. So a few things you can do in camera to get a little more dialed in or see kind of how your image is going to look in black and white is you can choose the RAW plus JPEG option for image quality in camera, and you can have your JPEGs converted to black and white in camera to sort of see how the image is going to kind of turn out before you do. Certainly don't have to do that, but that's an option to where you don't want to shoot strictly in black and white. You might as well shoot in color, so you have that option. You can always convert after the fact. When you're shooting in monochrome in camera or black and white, you don't have that ability to go back if you're shooting in RAW. So let's jump into Lightroom Creative Cloud and start working with an image. So in this image here, as you see, we brought it into Lightroom. It's a color image, nothing too crazy about it. Has its edits here. One quick thing we can do to convert this to black and white is hitting our V key. That immediately takes the image, converts it to black and white, and allows us to start using some other panels like the black and white mix panel. Now what this does is it sort of eliminates your hue and saturation adjustment sliders, and you're kind of working mostly with a luminance for your black and white. But as you know, it's automatically going to select the best range of what it thinks should be used, but you have the ability to start pulling some of these sliders down. It's very popular to pull down the blue, not that far, but a lot of images, sort of have some darker skies. Working with the red slider as well to pull down some luminance. As you can see, it really starts to change the appearance of our image. Just starting to mess with these black and white mix sliders. We can get into those a little bit more later. Your other option, and I'm going to kind of take our image back to color, is you can drop your saturation down to -100 and start working with some of your other sliders, the contrast, clarity, tone curve. Again, we'll get to the more specific sliders after this, but those are kind of your two really quick options to convert to black and white. It's very popular to drop the saturation and start messing with some of the tonality that way. That way you still have some of these other options to work with as well. Once you kind of pull the saturation down, vibrant is virtually useless at that point. But you also have the ability to work with a lot of your other sliders here. So if we were to change, I don't think we're really going to get much out of our hue and saturation. I don't think it's going to really give us anything. Let's see. No real changes at all. So you actually don't have any mixing options once you drop the saturation down. So you're a little bit more limited than converting to black and white. As you can see, our difference, we're going to go ahead and make a virtual copy here real quick. We can kind of see the difference of what just dropping the saturation does versus converting to black and white. As you can see, a little bit of difference in tonality. It kind of seems like the conversion to black and white image here has a little more darkness, a little more tonality. Dropping the saturation just kind of makes everything look flat overall. Not a huge change, but I think enough to where we want to keep this image here with the converting to black and white. So I'm going to go back here, and we're going to start looking at some other options as well. You do have the ability on some cameras, and I think a lot of the Nikons have this ability. You can change the profile specifically to um, for black and white. And so as you can see, I have a lot of profiles here. But amongst the standard profiles, you don't have the option to let's see, these are all going to stay in color. You don't have the option to change this image to monochromatic in the camera section. But if you have say a Nikon image, I could pull one up here real quick. Just throwing a photo of my son here, and we'll take a look at this image, and it'll actually allow us to change this to monochromatic in our panel here. So Nikon cameras have a little bit more of an advantage over the Canon cameras. However, as you notice, it removes our ability to do any sort of mixing. So it takes the image, kind of narrows our ability to make a whole lot of changes, and so there's limitations with using that option, but it'll give you a more out of camera look with your black and white if you're looking for a little bit quicker of a conversion. But going back to our image here, we can start to talk about things like density and toning, two very important elements of black and white photography. Now, as you notice that with our histogram here, sometimes there's going to be gaps, and if I put this back, normally with an image and sort of starting out, you're going to notice sometimes there's going to be gaps here in the edges of our histogram. That's relating specifically to the black and white points, and even more specifically to density. So as we start to pull this image, kind of where it starts out here, as you're noticing we're going to have a little bit of a gap here. And as we increase our exposure, our histogram sort of shifts more towards a more balanced exposure. And what we can do to make sure that we're getting absolute black or right to the edge of clipping for our white point and our black point. As you can see, white point is to the edge and good, but black point could use a little bit of work. We can hold shift, double click on the black panel. It's just going to get the images right to the ability of clipping. So if I hit my J keys, you notice there's a few spots here that aren't affecting our subjects. We could even go maybe a few steps further just to bring in some more black tone as well. An option, when we're clicking, we can hold option while clicking on the slider, and you can see those spots coming in as well. Same way works with the white slider. We can increase this to where we start to see clipping. It looks like just the top of the screen here. I'm going to turn off my loop. Let's see here. So with this image and how we're working with it, we've pulled the saturation down. I'm going to take this back and just convert it to black and white. So we can already start messing. We've already started looking at density and those kind of things. You can hold shift, like I said, to click on whites and blacks to get perfect white and black point. This is really wanting to pull a lot of white tones out because of our sky behind. Some other things we can do is starting to add some clarity. I already had it at +10, but we can add some clarity to give us some mid-tone contrast. And this works really well for landscapes and detail shots for your events. You want to be really careful what it does for the skin. The skin looks a lot smoother before we start to add this in. It kind of intensifies some of those imperfections. Now for a far away shot like this, I don't think we're going to have as much trouble with an image adding clarity. So I think it's okay in this case. Another thing that we can do is, you notice we still have zero contrast. White and black point are set. Put the white point back to there. We can start adding some tone curve, which is a great option as well. Don't know if I lost connection to my mouse here. And we're back. So we have the ability to add medium contrast, which is going to add just a real subtle S-curve. I'm going to back off the clarity because our tone curve seems to be adding quite a lot of tonality in this image, just to give us a little more drama. As you can see in our before and after, we're really taking this image to another to another realm, just in black and white, just seeing the differences between these two images. We're getting a lot out of this image for just being a black and white. So we can do a little more extensive work with the tone curve by messing with the custom points. We can lift the points to get some flat blacks in there. I know that's pretty popular, to sort of flatten some of those tones there. We can use this to flatten some of the whites. I don't think that looks great, so I'm going to leave that alone. But you do have these options here to start messing with those black tones, which just kind of makes them look a little more matte, which is really popular for that sort of fine art looking toning. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that as it is. I'm going to start working. Now we can go down to the black and white mix. Now what this is great about is you have an adjustment tool here, which is great to be using. It works for the tone curve and the other settings as well, but you can select in your areas that you're wanting to specifically affect. So we can pull down, it's going to pull down a lot of blues and kind of give us this nasty edge highlight here that we don't like. This image here would require something, maybe a nice sky to bring in, something like this to sort of complete the moment. And we have kind of a bright blown out sky here for our contrast, but we're shooting for all these dark areas specifically. But you do have the ability to do some work with the lifting up some of the rock areas. You can go into the dark zones and you can really start to change this mixing altogether. And really kind of bring some more drama into this image as a whole. And really, I mean, we haven't done any brush work, we haven't done any dodging and burning. I mean, we're talking about I'm going to go ahead and take this image, and what we can see here, you can really see just doing some work, and it looks as if we had done some dodging and burning in here, but just doing some work with Lightroom itself. I mean, you get a lot out of this image, just working with a few sliders as a whole. So what we're going to do now is we're looking at a comparison back here. Now what we're going to do is take this image and we're going to look at it specifically in Efex Pro and see what kind of things we can do there. So I'm going to make another copy. Yeah, you know what? We'll take this. We'll make a copy of this image, and we can take the settings back to just the converting to black and white here. Let's take this back. Convert this to black and white, kind of look at what we were able to do in Lightroom. Now we'll take this image from this point and we'll take it directly into Efex Pro. So we're going to go up here to our photo panel, hit edit in. We're going to go down to Efex Pro. And something too to remember is Nick allows this program's now free, the whole suite. So you can get Efex Pro, Color Effects, Visa, all of their other options as well. But Efex Pro is the game changer for me, at least, in using black and white software, and especially because it's free. It's a no-brainer now to use. I'm going to change my resolution here to 300. sRGB, Adobe RGB. I'm going to keep it in Adobe RGB just because it may be working in this file later in Photoshop. I think TIFF is the best option. PSD doesn't work in converting into a Efex Pro, so we'll keep that in as a TIFF file. As you'll notice here, we're not allowed to. It's not going to let us edit the original, so it's going to make a copy, and not a virtual copy, but an actual copy of this image. It's going to create a TIFF file and save it on our hard drive. That's something to remember too when using this plugin and a lot of the edit in plugins in Lightroom, is you don't have the ability to keep the hard drive from filling up with virtual copies. You have to sort of just make a copy, and it's not on the raw file or XMPs or anything like that. It rasterizes the file as a TIFF and brings it into Efex Pro. So as you see, I brought the image here. It's got nothing applied to it. You have a lot of presets. To use. You can drop the exposure, do a high contrast. Do not like that at all. This is sort of a neutral edit, which kind of removes all the fluff out of this. This is pretty popular for a high structure, and that's a a pretty popular tool in the mix software, specifically in Silver Efex Pro, is their high structure. It's very similar to clarity, but it's a lot more advanced than just simply lifting clarity for the mid-tone contrast and things. So what you notice here, we have a kind of nice little dramatic image here, low key. There's so many different presets that you can use for Lightroom. I say that it's best to use make a custom preset that you apply to your images and make any sort of adjustments as you need to go. I kind of like the low key one, but I've built my custom preset and applied it here. It just kind of does, middle ground edit, nothing too crazy. We can bring the brightness down on this image, zoom in a little bit on them, sort of see their faces and skin, as you see, are becoming heavily affected here. And that's going to be, when you add structure in, is it adds a lot of detail in the rock formations here, but it really kind of makes their faces look really gritty. But the important things to remember with Silver Efex Pro is you're making a copy of this, so you can create multiple versions as well. And so let's pull some of this fine structure down. As you can see, we kind of get rid of some of that grittiness on their skin, but we can keep some of this detail structure. Silver Efex Pro has a lot of options, and I've mentioned in a previous article, my Google That Shit article for the Nick suite. There's a lot more in-depth adjustments and talking about the different panels and things here, but I wanted to bring up Silver Efex Pro and sort of show from like a one-click standpoint of what it can do for you. When working with single images, it's great from Lightroom. If you're wanting to work with a bulk amount of images and apply black and white to say more than a handful, it works really well with building actions. You can create these custom presets to automatically apply in those actions, so everything can be a little more automated. But for Lightroom and looking at it, it's a little bit less efficient. You have to use sort of one image at a time, and it saves an image out. So Lightroom's, when working with batching, funny enough, it's not as efficient as Photoshop in that respect. So what we have here is we have some selective adjustments. Talked about that before. It's control points, a little more. If you want to work specifically with your subjects here versus wanting to isolate the all these sections in here. So what this allows us to do is we can work with their brightness, contrast. We can kind of remove some of the structure on them. And what that allows us to do here is add more structure and fine structure to our scene. We can remove some of that around them. Go back some of the contrast, pull up some of the brightness. We don't want to go too crazy. But it allows us to have a little more structure here and then a little bit softer. Now they're starting to look a little separated from the scene overall. You don't want to make it look too obvious, like we're balancing them separate. But we can, there's some finishing adjustments that you can add. There's this toning. I have a copper toning, some sepia, amber type, selenium, which is kind of nice, or just sticking with neutral. That's perfectly fine. Some different lens fall off options to kind of give a real quick sort of burning and nice little vignette there. We're a little bright here, and of course have to do some retouching and remove our human light stand. But you have some image borders. Not a big fan of these, but you can kind of fake like it was printed in the dark room, and I'm not a big fan of those. Kind of keeping the image a little more true form. But you notice here that we have this big gap in our histogram on the right hand side here. We have the ability to fix this in our film type. Let's see. So you notice we can bring that white point to the edge there if we're wanting to focus a little bit on our histogram. And kind of bring some of those flat tones back in. You have that same ability like you did in Lightroom to work with sort of some flat blacks. This I don't know if I want to create any more harsh white tones there. We have the ability to add some grain in. You have your different film negative presets here. These are I'm not really a big fan of adding film grain back in. But with fine tuning and making some adjustments, like I said, you can make your custom preset. This one could be Dustin Dramatic BW1. If I spelled dramatic correctly. And so I can kind of toggle between these two and kind of I can also, that one image that I really liked, that low key, we can add some structure into this. So this image here, what we do want to do is make sure we're removing selective adjustment. We can hit plus on our custom, and then we can do low key custom one preset. Just good to have. So now we can kind of toggle between our different options. You can see real quickly you're starting to create kind of a library of different presets that I want to use. So I can automatically start applying these to other images now that I have these presets built. This makes it a little bit easier. You want to go a little bit more let's see. Get rid of the control point so that way that's gone and that won't apply to all the images. But that gives us some options. Go ahead and export this one out here. I'm going to go ahead and hit save. It's going to bring this image back into Lightroom, saved as a TIFF, and now we can see our different options here. Kind of what we created. So this one was done in, this looks like this one was done in Photoshop. Oh. This is our virtual copy that we created here. As you can see, this image here was a Photoshop edit. The two we kind of want to compare these two here. So you can see a lot of structure, a lot of drama here on this right-hand image. Has just a different look overall. Of course, here we did kind of more of a fine art, a little bit flat with the black tones, a little more subdued. But it's kind of all about, it's one not better than the other. Of course, if there's haloing or bad edit habits in there, that's going to rule out an image to be something that I'd want to print. But you can see the versatility you have in Lightroom and what you can do implementing Efex Pro. There's a lot that can be done. So definitely take your time. Figure out your taste, your style, what you're looking to do for an image. You can get Um, there's a lot you can do to add back in, like in this image here, with bringing a sky back in, removing our human light stand, and using some of the structure elements. You know, of course, this image was done in Photoshop and edited a little bit further, but you can see you can get a really good base start with black and white photography just using Lightroom, implementing Silver Efex Pro too if you want as well. And so, you know, that's all I have for you guys for the converting to black and white. Reach out if you have any questions, and thanks for tuning in.